I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Abraham, the director of our program, and he will introduce Dr. Jonathan Brown of RIT and our Fulbright Alumni Ambassador. And again, please, if you have not muted, please do so right now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to what is the first of what we hope will be a mini series of professional development opportunities for you. We are venturing out as a program to provide you all with additional opportunities to learn and to get information that might help your careers and things, and to provide you information of areas and things that you might be interested in that we think are important for your development. So I'd like to thank you for being with us this afternoon at the first of what will be a series of these professional development opportunities. This afternoon, we'd like to welcome Dr. Jonathan Brown. He is Assistant Provost and Assistant Vice President and Associate Professor at Rochester Institute of Technology in New York. He is also a former Fulbright Fellow and Professor to Slovenia, and a current U.S. Fulbright Scholar Alumni Ambassador. In other words, he's going out and trying to get good people like you all to apply and to take a good look at these at the Fulbright Fellowship for your own career development. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, Dr. Brown. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Dr. A. I appreciate it, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for everyone who's joining us this afternoon. As Dr. A mentioned, we hope this is the first of many conversations to begin to really share the word, if you will, spread the message about the Fulbright Scholars Program and how it could benefit you personally and professionally. So today, typically, in this set at least, I will typically come to you with information about faculty and fellowship opportunities, but I'm not doing that today. Instead, I'm wearing my Fulbright hat, as you can tell. As an alumni ambassador and as a former Fulbright faculty member, I really wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about the world of opportunities that await, quite literally, through the Fulbright Scholars Program. If we think about this for a moment, there are a lot of things in which we're going to cover today, but I will do so looking, of course, at time and yielding a lot of the time at the end for question and answer. So without further ado, here's an overview.
Oh, I'm on the phone. Is that someone's cart?
Oh. No. All righty. So here are a few things that we're going to cover this afternoon as we kind of walk you through grasping a better understanding of the Fulbright Scholars Program. I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience, and hopefully that'll shed light and kind of introduce a series of questions for you. The benefits to you both personally, professionally, and institutionally. That's another one that we'll talk about momentarily. But I also want to provide you with a little bit of insight as to how I approach the application process. Two of the most frequently asked questions that come my way are, one, why did I apply for a Fulbright? And two, how did you approach the application process? So you notice I'll start off the conversation on those 2 points before sharing information about how you can start your Fulbright experience and also making those further connections later down the road. So let's begin. This is a very quick snapshot of who I am. That's me at the Slovenian Embassy in Washington, D.C. I was fortunate enough to have 2 Fulbrights, one in 2017 to Slovenia and one in 2018 to Belarus. The interesting thing about it, which is why the asterisks are there surrounding the 2018 Fulbright, is that, well, being a cultural and diplomatic program, the Belarus government decided in 2018 to cancel the program for that year. So unfortunately, I was not able to hop on the plane and head to Belarus, unfortunately. But so much of my conversation today will really focus on my experience abroad in Slovenia, teaching at the University of Maribor. I think there are a lot of things in which we can kind of glean from that example that will really, really pave the way for your thoughts and insight moving forward. So let's cut straight to it. One of the questions I mentioned to you before is, why did you apply for a Fulbright, and which typically leads to why Slovenia? So let me take that in two parts. Here are at least three reasons I applied for a Fulbright, but I think if you look at it in this holistic sense, it was really about a global or international exposure and expansion. I wanted to really develop a network of colleagues beyond the United States, those who are looking at similar issues that I am, at different universities, in a different university setting within a different country. My role here was to really get a better understanding as to how other individuals, how other programs, how other people, and how other students are grasping race and racism within the United States. That was the focus of my conversation and the focus of my time in Slovenia, looking at race in American politics. And so I chose to apply for a Fulbright for those reasons, to really, again, to expand tremendously my better understanding of how race and racism is viewed in a global sense beyond the United States. And Slovenia, why Slovenia? That part of the country, or that part of the world rather, has a very interesting dynamic. And in doing so, they have what I really find fascinating. The field of American studies really thrives in that part of Europe. So Slovenia, Austria, Germany, Croatia, Italy, and other places within the region have programs specifically set aside for the academic study of quote unquote American studies. In our sense, this would be the application of political science, sociology, and some degree communication studies. And so I wanted to focus on a country that had interest in further developing their American studies, particularly those countries that had an eye towards studying race and racism. So many reasons as to why I chose to apply for the Fulbright, and that was just a few. I think, and this is what I'll have to share later, is that when we think about applying for a Fulbright, you may notice that some of the countries, some of the opportunities may spawn up in places around the world you had never considered. In some places, you may need to refer to a map to give you a better understanding as to where they are. But the opportunities that await you are certainly tremendous, and I certainly encourage you to do so, which is a point of my conversation. The headline that you see there was an interesting one. Before I arrived to Slovenia, I was contacted by a news outlet, and they wanted to interview me, and they wanted to interview my thoughts on the election of Donald Trump. And so that conversation led to a whole host of further conversation with other media outlets and others, because again, their interest was learning a little bit not only about myself, but also race and American politics from the perspective of an American. And so, again, a lot of insight gained throughout the duration of this Fulbright. I really want to talk about my approach to the application. You have a better understanding as to why I applied, but let me share with you how I applied. So here are 4 points that really come to mind, and I want everyone to consider. For me, it was really about having a better understanding into the Fulbright application process. And so the first bullet immediately came to mind. I wanted to think about any and all international colleagues and collaborators, their institutions, their countries, and the centers that they have on their campus. For me, it was really trying to make a diagram of possible points of connection. What institution, what colleagues at what institution will provide me an inside glimpse into their program of study? What institution are trying to diversify their curriculum? In the European Union, for example, the term is internationalization. And so what programs, what institutions are trying to quote unquote internationalize their curriculum? And that's the standpoint for which I started. Next, I really consider the odds of earning a teaching Fulbright versus a research Fulbright. And so when I think about your area of expertise, because mine is largely related to race and American politics within the American sense, I knew that a research Fulbright would not be well received nor understood, knowing that there's no reason for me to venture to Slovenia to study American race and public policy. However, on the teaching aspect, though, that's where it made the stronger connection because of the programs in American studies, because of their interest in studying American politics and culture. So again, think about your own area of expertise and think about ways in which the teaching may be more beneficial to you to apply for, or the research interest may be more beneficial for you to apply to, but certainly give that some thought. Next, think about compiling an application narrative based around the needs and desires of both host institution and region. I really would implore you to do a little bit of research before applying. One of the greatest things here is that having conversations, sending emails and engaging in Zoom conversations nowadays would really lend itself to a lot of insight, in the sense that many of our universities here in the United States put forth strategic plans, so you can actually take a look at the blueprint as to where the institution's going in the next few years. This isn't necessarily the case in the European Union and beyond. And so for me, I was in great luck when I contacted University of Maribor, because I found out, of course, that they were trying to internationalize their curriculum. They wanted to expand their offerings in American studies to focus on areas in which were absent from their curriculum. So the question then became for me is, how do I craft a narrative that shows my area of expertise blending in or meshing well within their desires to really build upon their program and their degree offering? So keep that in mind, because oftentimes from a reviewer standpoint, this makes the case that much clearer. You have spoken to an institution, you have a better sense of their needs, and you've considered their needs within your application. Finally, if you took nothing else from this slide, please take the following quite serious. Obtain a letter of support. I can't say it enough. Obtain a letter of support. Why is this important? Well, consider this. From the standpoint of a reviewer, you've really done your homework. You're telling us that you have gone out, you have spoken to the institution has spoken to you, and there was a mutual understanding and agreement of shared interests, desires, and expertise. You're showing to us that you've really done the legwork for us. You've engaged in conversations to a point where the department or the institution itself has no problem lending you a letter of support. And that letter of support, I would certainly, if the conversation comes to it, just encourage the host department or the host institution to talk about the ways in which you and the institution have really cultivated a way as to how you will begin to expand upon their curricular offerings. This is extremely important because oftentimes many institutions are looking to expand their curriculum, diversify their curriculum in many ways. And so the way in which you can spell that out in a letter of support is undeniably one of the best things you can do. So again, consider your own colleagues. So first, check your network. 2, think about the odds of applying for a teaching versus a research Fulbright. 3, think about the narrative. How are you going to craft a compelling narrative to the reviewers? And 4, to help you craft that compelling narrative, always obtain a letter of support. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind as we move along. So here was my project. In 2017, I spent 6 months living in Slovenia, teaching in the Department of English and American Studies. It was a great experience. It's the only department at the university whose mother tongue, if you will, was English. Everything else was taught in Slovene. So I really lucked up there because my Slovene is good, but it's not great. And so this was an opportunity for students to learn more about not only the English language, which they were exposed to throughout the department, but also as a way of studying race and American politics. I'll share with you this. Depending upon where you go in the world, many of the students, as those pictured here, their recollection of the United States was only gleaned through MTV. MTV is still a popular outlet in that part of the world, and it's readily available on all cable packages. So just think about that for a moment, and that should give you a very good understanding of the level of exposure. But knowing that before you go, of course, it can prepare you for a lot of conversations to be had at play. So the professional impact of a Fulbright, it's nothing like it, quite frankly. If you think about what it can do for your tenure and promotion, what you can think about at doing for any sort of cases, primarily tenure and promotion immediately come to mind. It's one of the most recognized and most prestigious fellowships you can receive, period. Regardless of institution that you find yourself at, no one questions the credibility of receiving a Fulbright. No one. Oftentimes, if you check your own departmental standards for tenure and promotion, you'll notice that achieving a Fulbright alone gets you halfway, and in some cases, all the way, meeting the requirements for tenure and promotion. So consider that throughout the lifespan of your professional impact. For me, I took away 3 things that you can see here. I wanted to gain a better experience on the European Union approach to higher education. It is vastly different from ours. The best example I can provide you is this. Students within the European Union do not pay tuition to attend college. Think about that for a moment, right? If that sounds interesting to you, just imagine me having a conversation with them talking about our system where students do pay tuition, that students do go into debt. And so, again, an interesting set of conversations at hand. As I mentioned to you before, developing research area colleagues and, of course, partaking within the United States Embassy was an excellent privilege and an excellent opportunity to learn a little bit more about diplomatic ties between Slovenia and the United States and beyond. Here's one way that I would oftentimes think about selling Fulbright to an institution, but of course at this point, you really don't have to. The institutional impact for Fulbright is absolutely amazing because oftentimes the institution will simply ask you the following question as it did to me. From your Fulbright, what can you bring back to the university? Because oftentimes you'll find yourself being asked to give a presentation of some sort, having a talk, talking to students and faculty about the benefits of applying for and receiving a Fulbright. And for me, knowing the institution, of course, they wanted to keep their name in the highlight screen, if you will. And I knew there were 3 ways in which I can do that for my host institution. And so I've just collaborated those here at the bottom. But the institutional impact of applying for a Fulbright cannot be understated. There are rankings and categories that show the institutions that produce the most Fulbright scholars in America. They show it for scholars as well as students. And so, of course, every institution wants to have their name in the highlight reels of institutions that have Fulbright faculty members on their campus. So that can't be understated enough. The picture here is an international conference that we organized in 2019. This was post-Fulbright. I went back to my host institution to engage in an international conference that you see here. And so Fulbright should be understood as the gift that keeps giving, even beyond your duration as a Fulbright. Chances are you will be invited back. You will be invited back for a number of reasons. You will be invited to participate, to serve on committees, to serve on all sorts of things related to that institution and beyond. And this was just one of those examples. The personal impact. Look, I can't sell this any shorter than what it is. For me, it was a truly unique global experience. I gained a second family. I learned a lot about the Balkans, but it was just more than the professional. I think one of the messages that oftentimes is lost is that the personal appeal, the personal aspect of the Fulbright. And I can't simply say enough about the personal appeal. I had many opportunities to travel throughout the area of Europe and visiting neighboring countries, Croatia, Italy, Austria, Germany, and other places and beyond. And knowing, of course, that rail connectivity, right? So having the ability to simply hop on a train and be in Austria, in Germany, in Croatia, in Italy, and beyond is really just that simple. No car is needed whatsoever. And so there are a lot of opportunities available to you, really predicated upon your interest. So always keep that in mind, that there are a lot of personal gains to be discovered here. One of the greatest things about it is that partaking in this sense, within a Fulbright at this magnitude, you are really looked at as the American ambassador, if you will, looking at the multiple ways in which you contribute to cultural diplomacy, political diplomacy, and of course the interchange of ideas. The photo with the 2 gentlemen on my left, perhaps your right, I taught high school for a day. I was invited to teach at the local high school. They wanted to know as much about American higher education as possible. So that was my guest lecturing for the day. The video that you see was a trip to Zagreb, Croatia. And what they have in Croatia is called the Matura exam, or the equivalency of a high school efficiency exam. This was taken in May, right after students completed their exams. It is a tradition, as I learned, throughout Croatia and Slovenia and other parts of that of Europe, to celebrate this. The kids have just completed taking their exams, so what do? Take to the streets and party. And so the video that you just shown there were really of students just taking it to the streets to have a good time, unadulterated fun, for better or for worse, but just to give you an idea of the cultural differences there and how it's celebrated in such a public manner. I want you to take a moment to look at the ways in which you can become involved. Think about starting your Fulbright journey. These are certainly opportunities I would love for you to consider checking out more. And the websites that you see here are upon you that can really drive you in that direction. I think the awards.cies.org is another place when you think about a catalog of awards. What we do here is really give you a lot of background information as to the host institution, the award type, amongst other things. And I'll talk about this toward the Q&A here in just a moment, but I would certainly think about ways in which you can begin learning a little bit more about the Fulbright experience. If you're an institution, of course, there are ways in which you can host Fulbright scholars, and these are just 3 examples of that: Scholar in Residence program, the Outreach Lecturing Fund, of course, and the Language Teaching Assistance program. So if you're at an institution that's obviously interested in bringing Fulbrighters to campus, these are just a few ways in which you can do that. Finally, Fulbright, of course, like everyone else, wants you to stay connected. They want to have a conversation with you because they're very interested in ways in which we can begin to diversify not only the applicants, but those who are admitted into the Fulbright family. As I mentioned to you before, it's one of the most prestigious programs in the world, quite frankly, that's funded by Congress. This is one of the few things that receives bipartisan support year after year after year. We understand that individuals who obtain Fulbrights are the best in America, plain and simple. And it is no doubt in my mind that those of you joining me on the call and others are the best in America, which is why I wanted to put this presentation together to share with you opportunities that exist, whether it's today, tomorrow, next year, or 2 years from now, but really to give you an opportunity to think more about it. I'll yield here to questions and answers. I know, Ms. Veronica, I know you may have a slide that you wanted to incorporate as well, so I'll yield here to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brown. Looks like we do have a couple of questions, and one question is about qualifications if you already have a DVM, and the other part to that is whether or not Fulbright supports science or medical type research.
Sure. Yes, so having a doctorate in veterinary medicine, DVM, if I heard you correctly.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. No problem at all. One of the great things about Fulbright is that they support the longitudinal range of disciplines. So whether you're in arts and sciences, medicine, or beyond, Fulbright has a category of awards that reach across all disciplines, including the culinary arts. I shouldn't forget to mention that as well. Ireland has a very interesting one in culinary arts. And so yes, doctorate of veterinary medicine, no problem. Science, medicine, technology, engineering, no problem whatsoever.
Okay, and then a second question, is there a time limit from graduation that affects applying for the program?
A timeline, no. I will say this, every award is different. And so if you kind of scroll through the award catalog and you find something, I would certainly read the details because not every award requires a PhD. And so some of them require a master's or MFA, but again, they're all very specific. So it's not necessarily the case that every award requires a doctorate. And so, you know, with every award being different, it's hard for me to give you a general yes or no. Everything is very specific to the country and the institution.
Okay. Then another question is, does research have to be conducted only outside of the United States?
Yeah, so part of my Fulbright experience is that upon return, we had to provide a report, essentially, of what we accomplished throughout the duration of our Fulbright. Now, if you think about it, the Fulbright is paying you, and I should make that very clear. There is a little bit of bi-directional pay that goes into this, and if someone puts that in the chat, I'll come back to it. But insofar as doing research, when you come back to the United States, you certainly have the opportunity to do it. My research has been ongoing. And so I can just speak from this example just to know that Fulbright requires a report at the end of your Fulbright period, essentially discussing what you accomplished. Anything above and beyond that is really upon your personal discretion, your research discretion. I just wanted to ensure that in that one instance, there's one report that's required to fulfill the obligations of the Fulbright.
Okay. And then another question, I'm applying to the student award and I'm having difficulty finding an affiliate in my research area at a host institution. Do you have advice on finding someone?
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting question. My first thing would always be to check an academic unit, so match your interests with a similar department. If that department does not exist at that particular institution, then I think it may be worth looking elsewhere. One of the things I can certainly do, and let me see here, I know a lot of this is about the Fulbright scholars, but I will also invite anyone to take a look at our Fulbright Student Awards, because they have a list of FAQs and contacts you can engage as well.
Okay, and the next question, how are applications reviewed? For example, if I apply for a country that few other people select, would I have a more competitive application?
That's a good one. So here's the thing. One could say in theory, sure. You know, if you're one of two applicants, you have a 50-50 shot. But the question, of course, always comes down to this. How do you know those countries that receive the fewer applicants? So my thing is always this. While sure, we can certainly say that, let me pull it back just a little bit more just to talk about the review process. And so there are multiple layers of review. And so first and foremost, it's what I call the desk review to ensure that everything has been completed. You'll be surprised at the number of incomplete applications folks try to submit. And at that point, it moves to the reviewer level within the United States. And at that moment in time, reviewers really engage from a variety of disciplines, your application. And so I want to be very clear that if you're thinking about applying for a Fulbright, please do away with discipline-specific lingo. If you're in biology, please note that someone from the arts will be reading your application materials. And so doing away with that sort of disciplinary lingo certainly ensures that your application is most accessible across the full spectrum of reviewers. Now, if you are selected to move further, then your application goes overseas. It goes to the host institution as well as the embassy in that country. And so at that moment in time, your international cohorts and colleagues have a chance to review your application as well. And again, I'm not sure of the makeup of those individuals, but my sense is that they are the more discipline specific. But again, there are multiple layers involved, at least 3 layers of review that are involved. And so when I say this award is very prestigious, please know that you've been vetted multiple times, even before you are confirmed to any country. So just keep that in mind if that makes sense at all.
Okay. Also, can you go over the application period from what time to what time? And is there a recommended time to prepare your application?
Yeah. So every year, Fulbright announces, and let me see here. And so this was just this year. The application deadline is today, but there are different ways to think about this. So as you can see here, this is a timeline that Fulbright is using for 2020. It opened in February and it closed in September. Typically, this will be the application period, so you have plenty of time to apply. My recommendation is simply this. Spend a lot of time with this application, okay? Oftentimes I've met people who said, oh, well, I can do this in 48 hours. I would not recommend that whatsoever. Take the time, begin to look at opportunities and institutions and possible awards well before time. And so while this is for February to September, please note there are other opportunities that take place throughout the year, such as a Fulbright Specialist Program that would allow you to apply for Fulbright grants beyond this period.
Okay. Now this is a specific question, and the asker, you let me know whether or not this is something that you would need to answer offline.
Okay.
This person's research is in South Africa, but due to a long history there would not apply for SA. But do countries like Lesotho, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, Eswatini, ESWATINI, within the landmass but separate countries, be realistic alternatives?
Yeah, that sort of micro level detail I would not know. And I would have to really forward that question on to the folks at Fulbright because they have individuals who are regional specific, if that makes sense. So there's individuals who liaise with African universities and institutions who can answer that question better than I can.
Okay. And if anyone else has questions, please type them in the chat, and also know that we are compiling the questions and we will make the answers available to everyone.
Yeah. Let's see here. Let me say this while we get a few more questions going. One of the things that I neglected to mention is that as you begin to review Fulbright Awards, oftentimes they are accompanied by additional stipends. And so since one of the most compelling things about this is that while on a Fulbright, you don't lose your full salary. That's the point. And so many people believe that you take a salary hit when you apply and receive a Fulbright. That's not the case at all. So I want to be clear about that. Two, awards such as mine came with an additional stipend. It was a living stipend as well as a stipend to purchase books, amongst other things, for the institution. So there are many ways in which Fulbright provides for you above and beyond maintaining your current salary. So your transportation is paid for. Some awards actually provide you with housing. Mine did not, but they provided me a stipend for living expenses as well. So those are some of the great perks within each of the awards. So be sure to pay careful attention to that.
Okay, next question. Are the odds better or worse if you visited the host country before, or if you have some experience with the host culture?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. From my experience, I've visited the institution, I've spoken there before and engaged in conferences. And my belief is that I've already kind of primed the pump, if you will, within the department and their faculty. So they knew when they saw the application come through from the US side of the Fulbright, they knew very well that this is something that we've engaged before. So, which is why I said initially, think about your networks. If you have networks, established colleagues at international universities, in my opinion, it certainly helps because it puts a face and a personality behind the application.
With that living stipend, do all Fulbright scholars live with host families, or do they have their own accommodations?
Yeah, so I can only speak to what I know on this. And so with my experience and a few other awards that I know, we all had separate living arrangements. We did not live with host families. What I call the delegation to Slovenia in 2017 consisted of about 5 of us, and all 5 of us had separate living accommodations. So they were typically apartments in and around the city center.
Okay, and then looks like we need a little clarification. The asker says, I think I'm just confused overall on how this works and what requirements with your PhD research would qualify, i.e. identify a partnering international institution to perform part of my dissertation research where I would stay for an extended period of time if awarded a Fulbright, and then finish other aspects of my research once back in the US at the home university?
Okay, that's going to be a more challenging one, quite frankly, because many of the Fulbright awards either want you to teach or research. Now, the dissertation is an aspect that I know very little about insofar as a Fulbright Scholars Award, because for many of these scholar awards, the understanding is that you are how do I say, you're not involved in coursework or otherwise. But as I mentioned to you before, every award is different. Every single award is different. And so it's hard for me to generalize. So I would just say to this individual, take a look through the catalog at particular countries and opportunities and really get a good sense of what they're seeking. You may find that it's possible for you to engage in what you just described. By some institutions, and by other institutions, no. But again, which is why we always draw your attention to the catalog, because these descriptions are written by the universities themselves.
Okay. I have a PhD co-advisor that is at an institution abroad. Would it be okay to apply to his institution, to his research group, or any other research group there?
Yeah, I see absolutely no problem with that. And quite frankly, as I think about that situation, you already have, or at least my assumption is that you would have a letter of support coming from that institution already. And so I think, in my opinion, it would just increase your chances. So I would certainly say go for it.
Okay, and that person also says that the co-advisor is also one of her recommenders. Is that ethical?
Yeah, you know, I look at it this way. The letter of support will obviously come from the entire department and not just one person. So as long as that letter has the support of the department, I believe you're good to go.
Okay, and then going back to the DVM, so I could go to another country and teach veterinary pathology courses. Would that be something I would wait to do after completion of the PhD or during?
Yeah, so for that, I would certainly say that you would certainly wait until completion thereof, because in my view, it will open a lot more doors around the world for you once you have completed the doctorate.
And I believe you mentioned that not all awards require having the PhD. Is that correct?
Right, that's correct.
Okay. And would your research all have to be done overseas during the Fulbright program?
Yeah, you know, the expectation is that you engage in the vast majority, if not all. However, Fulbright does understand that research continues on. And so in my experience, I know Fulbright fellows or scholars who left their host country without necessarily fully completing it, but it was an ongoing process. And so I always look at it from that point. So long as you can speak to what you did and what you accomplished and what's in the road ahead, I think you'll be perfectly fine. But again, as I say, please consult the catalog, because some universities are very specific about that.
Okay. If you have any other questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay. I'll give people a couple more minutes to, okay, here's one. When
Sure.
does the Fulbright assignment typically begin?
Mhm. That's a great question. So in my case and in many cases, two things typically articulate this. One, the catalog would give you the institution's preferred start date. And so for me, the university wanted me to start in the spring semester. And so, which is why I was there from January to June. However, I will say this. If you are the right person, oftentimes there is a little bit of room to negotiate a start time. So for example, if upon completion of the application and you are the chosen individual, that start date doesn't work well for you anymore for a variety of reasons, certainly reach out and let them know and have that conversation. But oftentimes it's spelled out within the application catalog itself.
Okay, and is there an age limit to apply?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like I don't have any other questions yet, so we'll do this as a last call for any additional questions. And then two, if you think of questions after the presentation, please go ahead and send an email to doctoral.scholars@sreb.org, and I'll put that information in the chat. And we'll be glad to get the answer for you. And again, these questions will be compiled, the answers, and will be provided to everyone. Okay, and then I do have a couple more questions came in. If granted the award, I would want to go to conferences abroad. Would the award support this?
Yes, and so I think it's a perfect question, and here's why. You are still employed by your institution here within the United States. So always keep that in mind. I mention this because you should be available to the research funding that's guaranteed to you, whatever that is, year after year, regardless if you're on a Fulbright or not. I attended a few conferences during my Fulbright, and I use the research dollars that was guaranteed to me at my host institution in the US. So yes, and oftentimes your host institution may be able to assist you with that as well.
Okay, and then since we have missed this cycle, will we need to wait for the next cycle that opens in February? I plan to graduate in November.
Okay, well, I think that's perfect timing. Fulbright will release the dates in which it will open its next portal for the next season. So keep an eye out for that, which is why I said please follow them on their social handles and things of that nature. They make that announcement. And at that time, I would certainly encourage you to take a look at the new awards that have come to light since then.
Okay. And could you speak to the ways you wrote about the cultural exchange and why, in your case, Slovenia, maybe highlight 3 points?
Sure. This may surprise people, but I have no problem saying this on the record. As a Black man in America, I was treated a lot better in Slovenia than I was treated here. I'll let that sink in for a moment. One of the most fascinating aspects about my experience abroad is that, particularly in Slovenia, there was a lot of curiosity, but that curiosity was not malicious, point one. Point two, English is still looked at as a gold standard for linguistic accommodation, if you will. So oftentimes, even trying to speak Slovenian or Slovene, many people pick up on that quote unquote American accent very quickly and wanted me to teach them English. So I was teaching people English in places I shouldn't have been, from the grocery store to trying on pants and things of that nature. It was one of those experiences. Finally, let's talk about the relaxed environment, the relaxed culture. One of the observations that some members from the department said is that, quote, "You Americans are so strung up." And what they meant is that the culture there is far more laid back. It's nothing to sit at a cafe for an hour and a half with just a coffee or some sort of pastry. The way of life is a lot slower and a lot more relaxed and laid back. And so those were very interesting takeaways for me and adjustments that I had to make, along with a few other things. The lower cost of living was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. But of course, at the end, there were also some challenges insofar as once you travel beyond a certain region of the country, how well your language skills within that country come into handy. And so those are just a few things that I'll just make quick note of.
Okay. And then what if you are self-employed? Does that affect your application process?
No, there are scholars who have attained Fulbrights who are not affiliated with any sort of institution. So no, again, I would just focus primarily on the Fulbright catalog, but I can't think of one off the top of my head that requires affiliation to a college or university.
Okay. And I am currently employed by a state agency and not a university. I am in the job market for university opportunities. Therefore, is the opportunity only accessible to current university faculty?
It really will depend on the award in which you're seeking. I will say this, that if you look at it from the standpoint of university faculty, obviously you have a lot more support from your host institution here in the United States to pursue a Fulbright. There are a lot of benefits to that. I would certainly, in my recommendation, I would certainly ask that you perhaps consider waiting until you are a member of the faculty, because obtaining a Fulbright will be used to your benefit when you think about tenure, promotion, and other sorts of financial benefits as well.
Okay. And then someone wants to know, were you fluent in Slovene prior to applying?
I'm laughing because the answer is no. I really tried to learn as much as possible, and it certainly helped. I'm not going to lie, it certainly helped. I was not fluent, but I did brush up quite a bit, and that was certainly helpful on numerous occasions.
Okay, and then we have a follow-up question. Is there a typical cycle to look for Fulbright dates, i.e. January versus spring or late November, etc.?
Yeah, the funny thing about the whole Fulbright is that while they can give you an application window, so in this case from February to September was a window, the awards on the other hand are all over the place. And so I started mine in January, but there were some that started in August and September. I really want to impress upon everyone that the American academic calendar is not shared throughout the world. And so our academic calendar is far different than the European Union's academic calendar. So I actually came in, quote unquote, early to begin my Fulbright, because their semester didn't begin until sometime in February, while we were already back in class in the US. And so those are some things just to keep in mind that you would certainly need to give yourself a moment to review, which is why some awards begin at September, October, because that's the beginning of their academic cycle.
Okay, and then since I'm applying to the student award and I graduate May 2021, I won't have access to funds any through SREB or my home institution any longer. Are there other fund sources through Fulbright to access for in-region professional development?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, here's where I would really kind of divert that to the folks who serve on the student end, because they can share far more information on this than I can.
Okay, and it looks like that is the last question. It looks like we have about 6 minutes left. So if anybody has one last question, please go ahead and type that in or email it to us at doctoral.scholars@sreb.org. And I'm going to share a short PowerPoint. Actually, it's just one screen here. Oh, another question popped in. The 2 Fulbrights that you received, were they under the same award category?
Good question. No. So the first one in 2017 was a Fulbright Scholar Award, and the other one in 2018 was a Fulbright Specialist Award.
Okay. Oh, well, I'm trying to. Looks like I'm having some difficulties, but just a few reminders, everybody. Please don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We have past newsletters available, and also if you would subscribe to the doctoral chat, we'd appreciate that, because those are ways in which we share opportunities not just from SREB, but also from our partners and other institutions that have things that we believe would be of interest to our audience. And I will also put these links into the chat. So I'll turn it over to Dr. A and Dr. B if there's any other comments that you have.
Just a couple things. Dr. Brown, let me thank you very much for leading us off and being our guinea pig for our first professional development webinar. We do appreciate you very much for the information. You know, I even thought I knew some things about it. I learned some new things about Fulbright. So this is very good, and thank you very much. I would like to remind all of you who chimed in today. And first of all, let me say thank you for all of you for tuning in today for the presentation. And also, I would like to remind you, because of all the wonderful things you all are doing out there, we want to know if you get a Fulbright or if you get any other kind of award through your university, through your city, or through your professional association. Let us know those things, because we want to promote the good work that you all are doing. And I have just this morning, one of our scholars was on the national NPR program this morning, Crystal Anderson. I don't know if any of you listen to NPR in the morning, but she was talking about K-pop, and she is one of the country's experts on K-pop. So, but as all of you achieve what you do as you move through your careers, be sure to stay in contact and let us know that information. We would be greatly appreciated. Veronica would be particularly appreciated, as she's doing our newsletter and communications. Again, Dr. Brown, thank you very much. And for all of you, stay tuned, because we will be we've got some other programs, webinars planned for a little later this fall and into the spring. So stay tuned, and thank you all very much.
Yep.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
You all have a good one. Thank you.
Bye-bye.